Mauritius gains from wealth migration in various forms. The very fact that wealth is migrating to Mauritius indicates the confidence which the wealth owners have in the jurisdiction of Mauritius. And that is a very positive signal which can go across the globe. When the wealth comes in, it can come in for two purposes. One, it could be deployed in the country. So obviously it becomes capital for growth for that country. It could be otherwise shifting its home so that it gets invested in various other jurisdictions, and then it offers what we call wealth management opportunities, which generates obviously a lesser income, but it generates income, it generates employment as the case might be, and therefore it benefits immensely. And this benefit becomes even larger because it's a small economy, and it has to be driven, or its growth has to be driven largely by service sector, and the service sector requires a larger pool of wealth which they can help in its deployment subject to the owners of that wealth and generate a fee income and continuously generate employment. So it gains immensely from this trend.
Right. How else is Mauritius leveraging all of this, these benefits?
So Mauritius is making sure that it, in terms of its rules and regulations, in terms of its legislation, which give a lot of comfort to the wealth owners, are constantly relevant, are constantly benchmarked against other jurisdictions, and that effort is ongoing. So both the regulators and the government ensure that the image of Mauritius as being a safe place to house your wealth or deploy your wealth continues to remain relevant in the environment which is changing constantly. And I personally believe that we are at a stage where you can create the future, you can create the environment, and that's the transition which Mauritius will make by being more proactive and making sure that this trend continues aggressively over the next few decades.
How can the rest of the continent benefit from wealth migration, or can the rest of the continent benefit in the way that Mauritius has?
So, first thing, as I tell you, once you have a perception that the country is doing well and there is a confidence in the political system and there is a trend line of economic growth, then the chances are the wealth which is being created in each country would be deployed in that country and would benefit the growth. And if your GDP shows a positive trend and all other factors are pointing towards that this economy is a safe environment, then the country can also benefit in terms of migration of wealth. Even otherwise, Mauritius has a dual role. One is being a recipient of wealth, and then having its deep understanding of the African continent. It actually can be and is an advisor for routing that wealth into various corners of Africa, depending upon how the wealth owners perceive that particular risk. So both ways, if there is a larger deployment of wealth into Mauritius, and the African continent and the African countries can clearly demonstrate that they are on a trend line of safety, growth, stability, and positive GDP accretion, it can become a very effective channel into this continent. And then both can benefit. You have to admit that for Mauritius, Africa is the hinterland. The size of activity which Mauritius can generate is limited. They have to grow in the services sector, or in the innovation sector, or in the technology sector. But when you come about a large-scale manufacturing platform, they can provide capital and advice, and that's the bonding and the friendship and the economic activity between Mauritius and the African continent, which will be seen to rise significantly over the next years.
You've touched on it a bit in most of your answers, but I want to ask straight out and directly, how can countries across the continent, what can we learn from Mauritius?
I think what you can learn from Mauritius, you will hear different people talk about this subject in terms of political stability, the rule of democracy, rules and regulations, the legislative environment, the judicial environment. But let's park that at one side, because that's, in my opinion, they are the basic requirement to lay the foundation of economic growth. But outside of that, what a lot of countries and continents and jurisdictions can learn is that you need to be flexible, you need to keep track of what's happening in the environment, and you need to remodel yourself depending on the environment and depending on the needs of the owners of capital and what they want. And that comes by way of research, that comes by way of developing an understanding with the investor base, and that's where you can leapfrog. And that's what Mauritius has shown, and that's a great takeaway which other parts or other countries or other jurisdictions can adopt. And once again, coming back to what I said in the beginning, this is the time when you can create the future. And this is the time when the continent can take that big leap forward, build the confidence. Confidence building is very important. People are willing to understand that the market did not go right, and they will accept losses because of that. But if the losses are because of reasons which are unacceptable, then the investor base becomes very agitated, dissatisfied, and uncomfortable. And that's when a situation arises that investment flows stop. Market behavior, every investor will accept. Other issues which are local driven, they will not be able to digest, and therefore will channelize the investment elsewhere.
Right. Sage words. Well, before we wrap up, I just wanted to know, what have you taken away from some of the discussions that you've heard already from the CEO forum that we're at, and what are you looking forward to, because we're still in the midst of it?
So there's very, I would say, very vital and very meaningful takeaways. One thing which is very clear, that the African continent, first of all, is extremely large. It constitutes about 54 countries, and their performance, their political system, their stability, their skill sets are dramatically different. So therefore you can't equalize them. But what is a trend which is emerging is that all economies are producing a positive GDP growth rate. So therefore they have started to do well economically. There is also a trend line that there is an attempt, and a very sincere attempt, in terms of preserving the principles of democracy and offering political stability and the confidence to the investor and the local population, as the case might be, that safety is not that much a concern anymore. And this is laying the foundation that this continent would be a recipient of investment for a long period of time, because collectively it's a large market. It has a huge demographic advantage that it has a younger population at the end of the day. So a stage is going to come when this continent will supply the workforce to the whole world, or develop the skill sets to develop their own specific country. So the future looks bright, and this future is likely to remain for a good 2 to 3 decades. So the opportunities will continue to emerge. The investors have to think what's the right time to come. So the sooner you come, the better off you're going to be. So I think a great future